Welcome to the next episode of Crack the Code, episode 3, Cloud Native Applications and the Future of Software Development. I've got Ion here today with me. Welcome, Ion.
Yeah, thank you, Adrian, for having me. I appreciate it.
No worries. Thanks for joining. Ion has 20 years experience in IT. He previously worked in Japan, starting a startup, and later on joined Merrill Lynch. Eventually, he moved to Merrill Lynch in Singapore. He also worked for Commerzbank, holding various team leading roles. And in 2016, he joined Standard Chartered Bank, where he built a new digital bank in Hong Kong. So we will spend some time talking about that experience later on. Ion currently works for SingTel. Would you like to tell us what you do there today?
Yes, I just recently joined SingTel, so I'm very fresh in the new role. So in SingTel, I'm part of the SingTel Enterprise, which is focusing on external customers. And I'm currently trying to build a team, the DevOps engineers with the cloud engineers, that we can build a new solution and help customers to migrate to the new cloud native environments and applications.
Awesome. Thanks for that. So what I wanted to do, I might just quickly give a bit of a kind of overview of DevOps and how I've seen it. And then if you're okay with that, we might just jump in the first question. Does that sound all right?
Sure. Sounds good.
All right. So the original goal of DevOps was always to ship high quality software faster. So Git repos have become very, very popular. A lot of those CI tools have then appeared in the communities, in the DevOps communities. And updating code became very easy, and it was now possible on an hourly basis. With that, automated deployments came into effect, with developers having literally not to type any line of code anymore. This is very, very useful and powerful in action when you see that. But it's also scary when it comes to testing and authentication. So my first question for you, Ion, is how do you feel about the switch to cloud-native architectures? And it obviously became popular in the communities. And how does your enterprise deal with that, moving from monolithic software architectures to cloud-native microservice architectures?
Yeah, so your question covers like so much broader meaning and the context. So probably as a context to build, yeah. So as agile, lean development, mostly agile started like in 90s. It's nothing new, right? Probably lean came in 2000s with the lean development and so on, right? And the agile and lean tried to solve the problem communication with the business and development, right? And the still operation was left apart. And when the people realized that was DevOps came into the play, that was missing piece. Okay, so now you have a good communication with the business, you can develop the product, but still release maintenance. We still create a problem during the release cycle management, right? Mm-hmm. So that's why the DevOps actually culture was growing, like, oh, let's communicate the development operation to create a single team, right? And it was a cultural change. It wasn't about the tooling, wasn't about anything else. Yeah, it's about a mindset. How do you collaborate as a teams, right? Now coming, and it's evolved, right? So this is like as well. DevOps is not new. It's already like in discussion for the past almost 10 years, even no more, right? So, and it slowly evolved. So it's completely evolving. It's still evolving, right? What DevOps mean? Now it evolves DevOps, DevSecOps, DevBizOps. You have all this new terminology, right? Yeah. Which is like everybody understand their own thing. But if you go to the roots, it's about the managing simplicity and communication between the development operation and create, just to remove this barrier where the single team responsible, you run it, you basically you code it, you run it, you deploy it, right? So coming to the cloud native side, which is basically more closer to the question that that you posed. Actually, I think at some point people start preferring like GUI, very nice visualization tools, right? Mm-hmm. But I don't think that this solves actually the core problems. If you go, like, I just recently was meeting with a few big banks, CIO, CTOs, right? And insurance companies, and everybody said, oh, our teams build so beautiful tools, like 1-2 clicks, we can create infrastructure in the cloud and on the premise, right? And when you start asking the simple question, okay, how if let's say if it failed deployment, or you want to change, or you want to revert back, what is the integration with the source control system, right? Is an integration there? Do you have any traceability, any policy that on top of it, any that audit can perform, right? So all these pieces are missing. It's very nice, but it's quite useless because most of the developers will never use because they don't understand why would you need that, right?
Yeah.
Additional complexity came in once everything which is a cloud native deployment is become very blurred between development and operation. Now you don't have before it was very clear, like you want to configure like a load balancer was operation job. You want to deploy the code is the development, right? Once it came into Kubernetes, I mean, when you deploy it, I mean, you create a service which is like expose the ports or expose as a load balancer, right? It's already the developer job. It's not anymore operation per specific, right? Now these teams, everything is becoming so blurred. You don't have any more like developers and operation. Everything is a code, yeah? So from my perspective, how from in the companies what I work in, currently what I try to change the culture as well in the SingTel, so we should treat it as a code. Everything should be a code traceable, use source control system, including documentation, right? Documentation should be part of the code, right? It should be like some Confluence or some wiki, right? Because most of the people, you always try to see, okay, if you write the code, you always try to see the comments on the code or how do you integrate documentation. It's a few framework that can read the comments and basically generate dynamically documents for you to see how the code is structured, right? So probably this is I think it's the future and slowly it's coming. And more it's open source. So I'm not sure.
You're touching on an interesting point here. I picked up cultural change. That's one of the questions. Technologies which are out there, which are evolving and changing, and you mentioned a couple of those: load balancers, container orchestrators, and so on, which I want to touch on a little bit later. But there is technologies are one aspect, but what about the people and the culture? How do you face those challenges of the processes you have in place and the people you may have in the organization, which may know the old way, they may not know the new way? What are the challenges there?
Oh, this is probably it's the most difficult part, right? It's the people. So technology is easy to learn, easy to onboard, right?
Yeah.
But who's writing the code, who's actually creating the change are the people, right? If the people are not willing to change, it's very difficult to drive it, yeah? And one of the big mistakes, because the people assume the change should happen immediately or like in the sprint. And actually for me, it's like any change is more like a marathon, right? It's not like a huge immediate change. It's more like a consistent change every single day, but change little bit by little bit. And at the end of the year, you see how much road you pass, right? But the idea to have a clear vision and consistently change day to day instead of having the big sprints, radically change month after month. So and by
absolutely. I agree on that. It's interesting. Within our team, we had an interesting discussion yesterday, actually, on that topic. I agree. If you change every day 1% over 70 days, you see a tremendous change. But if you try to change on day one, 30%, you will not see that very quickly. So that's maybe something you're referring to culturally, where you need to change as an individual person. But and how about the processes you might have in the organization? How do you manage those? The processes involve multiple people's opinions and involvements. What's the challenge there?
Okay, it's about the leadership, right? On the process management side, right? You have because I work in the big organization in the banks, right? Because it's highly regulated and you have the processes of the processes, and usually they started in decades ago, and now with you look at the process, what was invented 10 years ago is like doesn't make sense anymore, right? With a new tech stack, right? And first probably is it's ownership, right? Who is owning the process? So a lot of processes in organization, nobody knows who owned them, right? Or they are so old that nobody owned them, but everybody assumes that it's a valid
so it becomes a collaboration aspect from what I'm hearing.
Yeah, so probably now it's an ownership of the process, right? And try to understand, okay, so every process that was created, we try to solve some problems, right? You need to understand what kind of historical problem try to solve and what kind of new problem you try to solve and make it more flexible, more agile towards your goal. Basically, if you want to move the cultural change in your organization to make it more agile, more lean, probably you need to adapt the processes around it. Yeah. For example, most of organizations failed in implementing agile framework just because they don't know how to adjust the processes. Example, budgeting, right?
Right.
How do you adjust the budgeting towards the agile framework? It's a very difficult problem to solve, right? It's just by having stand-ups, it doesn't mean your team become agile, right? Or having burned out charts and everything, right? So it's a mindset. It's so all organizations need to lean towards this change. It's not like single you change the process and everything change. Not everything should be aligned towards, right? So
yeah, absolutely. From what if I may just quickly summarize, what I'm hearing is it really comes down to accountability and being able to collaborate and actually be transparent about that. That this is the accountable person owning the following and trying to drive that. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. I mean, don't be afraid. This one another thing, right? So don't be afraid to experiment, right? So people, it's just not at the end of the world it doesn't work, right? This is idea. You iterate, because agile framework or anything agility or DevOps culture implementation, right? They give you some ideas. May work for your organization depending on the cultural context, on the resistance to change and so on, or may not work, or you may need to invent a new one. Be flexible enough to try it out to see what works, what doesn't work, just throw it away, right? But don't be afraid just to try it out and different way to see which best suits the organization and culture inside your teams, basically.
Yeah, and this is actually the whole benefit. It's quite nice. It's a nice segue talking about challenges into the benefits, because if we work in an agile way and methodology, you actually have room for trialing and finding the errors and improving yourself, versus just running a bigger program of work which relies on certain milestones to be hit before you can move on to the next step. So that's one of the benefits I guess you get out of working in an agile way. Just as another little question I have here for you, considering we are now in COVID, it's very difficult to be in the office. It's very difficult to see each other. It's not straightforward to communicate with each other. The DevOps engineers generally have a very unique way of finding a way to communicate, be it Slack, be it asynchronously through some sort of ticket management system you may have. How do you feel in the community at the moment to manage those cloud native application projects in these tough times right now?
No, I think the focus is shifting, like especially in these times when everybody works remote, the focus is shifting tremendously, right? I'm not a big fan of working remote, right? I think that when the team is co-located, the flow ideas, exchange and help how you get into the team interaction, it's fundamentals, right? And now once the teams start working remotely, right, it's very difficult to adjust. You see everything slows down to the crawl, right?
Okay, interesting. So you actually see it slow down.
Yes, significantly, right? Only way I see how to manage is to manage like a open source project on the, so which is very successful working remotely, right? If you start analyzing why they are successful, what kind of technique, but usually all these projects are usually in the two different categories, right? Or you have like benevolent tyrant who just control everything, right? Or you have like the core team who controlling like most of the decision, right? So I think the model, what I think will be more successful if we take a look more in open source, big projects, how they collaborate, how they manage, right? And probably to learn from them and to see how we can collaborate remotely to be more efficient as a team. As for my observation, purely as of now, it's become more difficult, more slower, because dynamic of direct communication with the team is just you are missing this part, and it's a lot of creativity basically. One of example, for example, when the Steve Jobs was designing the for the Pixar movie, right? When they're designing the studios, actually they designed specifically the toilet to be in the middle, that all the different peoples can meet and can discuss on the way, and as far as way is possible to deem the space to have this interpersonal communication, right? And this part is very human, and it's very important to have this communication. That's why the creativity, a lot of ideas came from, I think, and that's why I think it's missing, and probably we need to learn another way to replace it with something.
You actually see today degradation of your effectiveness in your DevOps teams just because of COVID.
Yes, because of the remote work, and probably people are still not used to how to work remotely efficiently.
Right, interesting. You touch base on an interesting point on open source technologies. It's one of those things in DevOps that a lot of problems get solved by individuals. They have the need and to contribute back to the open source community, and they donate a project. How do those kind of projects get embedded in larger enterprises, such as the one you work on today?
Again, probably this trend started like 10, 15 years ago when open source became very common in like a big enterprises. Like before, like only like a big guys like HP, IBM, who had like huge sales team and huge team who development and support. And people slowly realize it because they want to be more independent, or they have access to the source control, or they need to have more customization, right? So probably this is one of the biggest driven motive. Plus, a lot of the engineering who change, more younger generation who are used to run more control what they run, not used to somebody tell them what they need to run, right? Push these small trends for the past 15, 20 years, right? This is a huge change in the enterprise level, right? Why it becomes so much more easy to adopt, right?
Yeah.
And now if you go to the market, how it's radically changed. If I remember in the banking or even the SingTel, right? It's open source first now, right? If you choose the vendor, in the worst case scenario, if you can not find any open source solution, right?
Yeah.
And you choose like closed source vendor, right? Now this is a trend.
And do you also, in addition to that trend, talking open source first, but do you also see a trend in cloud second, or do we want to see something where we manage or even scale cloud infrastructure needed for the DevOps work? There's a lot of technologies which came out probably like 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago, such as Docker containers, and Mesos was really good at managing infrastructure. Now you see Kubernetes out there, which give you completely new approaches to manage infrastructure. And although they are complex technologies, but they enable the DevOps engineers to actually push the application much quicker to at least to a testing phase, and then obviously to production. How do you feel about those technologies in enterprises?
I mean, I see it as a natural evolution, right? For example, if you look at the mesas that you mentioned, right? What they try to do, they try to emulate the classical deployment model, right? Take a container treat it as a pet, right? And make sure it is very nice and you can always babysit it, right? So when the Kubernetes took a completely different approach, it's more like in the Google based on the Borg project, right? In-house, right? What they took it, like I said, everything is like a cattle. So you don't care if they die, right? It's a very different philosophy, and slowly like evolve more, or people realize the value, right, of it, right? So probably it's every single technology they try to emulate all the way more efficiently, right, using a new technology, and slowly they transit to more like evolutionary, something more new, which is more evolution in some way, right, which has changed radically not only the functionality but also the mindset. How do you approach the problem in the first place, and how you develop around it, and the tools just same with the cloud, right? The cloud, if you start maybe like 10 years ago when it started to be popular more or less, right? And I remember
absolutely. I've been following the Kubernetes community over the last 3-4 years significantly, and I've been visiting those conferences, the KubeCons in Europe or in the US, and I can see how they grow. I can see the popularity of it. It does simplify a lot for the developer, but it does also open new kind of rooms for allowing potentially security to build out upon. So that's actually one of my last questions here, moving into this paradigm of shifting left with the security. So basically apply security framework scans and compliance testing much more early in the development life cycle. How do you feel about that in your organization?
I think this is it's a must. It's not something like it's optional. Like we just recently, like few days ago, with the Garmin being like with ransomware, right? With all this news popping up with with a big impact on the organization in the technology space, right? Because they didn't manage security properly, right? If before, let's say maybe like 20 years ago, everybody said, oh, network security, right? Let's close the ports, let's keep ports open, let's monitor like rootkits and so on, right, on the Linux server and so on, right? More recently, oh, then we'll go like PHP, SQL, like injects and so on. Now, more recently, right, it's so the tools itself, the hacking tools and security tools become so advanced, right? You cannot afford anymore. You need to go to the root. So basically, starting scanning from the your source code, right? On the common vulnerabilities, buffer overflows, memory overflows, and so on, right? To networking as a security just to allow everything open, right? And additionally, to make sure like you can always recover, right? As well, the same concept as treating everything as a pet. If something like even Kubernetes go down, you can spin up another Kubernetes very quickly and try to patch the holes, right? So
yeah, absolutely. There's components in Kubernetes that are meant to help you with that as well, like you say, treat it like cattle, and the pods come back up again. But probably just in the last part of it, we covered quite a lot. Manage your code, build your CI pipelines, and we spoke about Kubernetes and deploying it, security. How important is it for an organization to manage all those different technologies as part of their DevOps platform? How important is that?
Yeah, it always balance, right? Or like you go in a single vendor, right, and you focus on it and you try to be efficient. Or you try to take a zoo of the technology and each application doing the best on the area, right? Probably it's not one better over than another. It's very much depending on organization culture, because usually it's a mimics how the organization is structured, right? So from organization perspective, probably the most important thing will be the developers and people, right? And this is a lot of neglect, I think, from organization, because it's still like a big organization, especially in Asia, it's treated like teams as resources, right? Not as a value, right? So probably this is one of the, what I see, I mean, slowly it's changing, but people understand that just hiring 50 developers, it won't make it project faster, right? It'll make it actually slower, right? Hiring like 3 developers may replace another 30, right? If you know how to organize them, motivate them, and focus them, right, on the value delivery, right? Again, these concepts is slowly coming, but you see the shift. I think the organization is better to focus not on the tools. Tools change, right? They always evolve. New tools come in, better tools come in. So it's if you start like focusing on purely on the tooling part, probably you waste your time. Yeah, you just choose the best tool for the job. You better invest in the teams who understand and who choose the best tools and understand how to manage the tool. Probably I'll invest in this part.
No, it's actually a very, very good point. I always say, just to summarize on that, I always say that there is the product, the people, and the process. Products can, like you said, can always be improved. There's always somebody who will find a better way of doing something and make this product available. The people, they need, like you discussed here earlier today with me, that it does require leadership, accountability, and it does require to also have the right processes in place. And I totally agree that just getting more developers in will not necessarily help you run faster. I totally agree. Okay, well, these are the questions I had for you today, and I wanted to thank you for your time today, taking it out of your day and giving us your feedback. It's very valuable opinions and feedback, and what you shared here with us today. So I appreciate that, and thank you.
And thank you very much as well. And I hope this idea may resonate with people who watch it. And it's definitely we can exchange and learn from each other as much as we can.
Absolutely. I'm a big fan on networking, big fan on LinkedIn. You can also find me there, and we can connect and communicate further there. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yep. And thank you very much. Thank you very much for hosting me.
Thank you.